Welcome to Ordinary People Doing Extraordinary Things, the podcast show. I am your host, Carrie Roberts, and I have yet another extraordinary guest, Miss Mijha Godfrey. Welcome. Thank you for being here tonight.
Hello. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So we are talking today about how we can kind of help parents teach their kids about empathy through books that embrace and celebrate diversity, and kind of talk a little bit about your story as well. And I would love for you to start off. How do you define the word empathy?
For me, empathy is the ability to put yourself in another person's shoes. That's really just like the short of it. It's not feeling badly for a person, like that's sympathy, trying to feel but empathy is putting myself in your shoes and trying to feel what it is like to be you.
Yeah, I think that's a really good definition. And again, it is different than sympathy. And I want to start reading something that you wrote in a blog, on your website. And I'd love to kind of just hear you talk about it. So you said, when I was a child, beauty was white or white proximate. When Vanessa Williams won the Miss America pageant in 1984, my mom and grandmother cried. Right there in the living room, they cried and hugged and celebrated. When The Cosby Show started in the same year, it was a must-see TV show in my house. Without DVRs or streaming, we had to be in place on time at 8 p.m. Thursday nights to watch our favorite family. I always sprawled out on my stomach under the coffee table. My grandmother sat in her chair, and my mom sat on the couch. Watching The Cosby Show planted the idea that I might want to go to Princeton, like the eldest Huxtable daughter, Sandra. Positive representation of Black people in the media was so rare that when we came across it, we ran to it like lost souls in a desert running to an oasis. Of course, we had Jet, Essence, and Ebony, all Black mass media for decades, but there is something about stories. Whether they're told on screen or in books, stories convey a society's sense of itself, what is acceptable and unacceptable, real and impossible, and normal. I would love for you to talk about that. First of all, that was beautifully written. So already there's kind of this story painted, right? Can you kind of take us back, what was that like, and kind of dive into this a little bit deeper for us?
Sure. When The Cosby Show came on, I was living in a smallish town in Kentucky called Hopkinsville. And I had moved there from New Jersey. In this town of Hopkinsville, I can think of maybe one person who was not either Black or white. Everybody else was Black or white. And so the world was a little bit narrower than I had known when I was in New Jersey. But what was more was that it was there I started to get a sense that there were things white people did and things Black people did. And those two things did not cross. It was there that I started to get a sense that, white people were going to have more, be able to do more, and Black people were not. Even though I knew incredible, wonderful Black people who were very smart and always encouraged me, among my peer group, there was always this sense. Further, it was this sense of, you can see me. I am dark brown skinned, and my hair is in locks now, but when I was young, it was just natural. And you kill yourself under the pressing comb, trying to make it straight, because that's how it was acceptable. That's how it was pretty. You weren't going to wear your hair out and nappy, because that was not acceptable. That meant nobody loved you. And if you were light skinned, then you were prettier. If your hair kind of curled a little bit when it got wet, but curls you could run your hands through, that meant you were prettier. So it was all of these messages that I was receiving about what was acceptable, what was pretty, and also how women could and should be in the world. So it was so important for me to be able to see other families, other Black families living in other places doing different things. My family, I'm very fortunate, and they're all like very well educated. I'm fourth generation female college educated on my mom's side, which is extraordinary. And they'd all gone to Tennessee State University. And so the idea was, well, you're going to go too. And I wasn't sure I wanted to stay in that region, right? I thought maybe I want to go back to New Jersey. And then here's Sandra going to Princeton. What? What is that? And so, and then, every week, Bill Cosby would wear a different sweatshirt with a different college name on it. You had to look, well, what is this Howard? What is this? What is this Spelman? And so it just opened up all of these things that I didn't know about, right? And I don't expect like Ebony and Jet and Essence to do all of that heavy lifting. They're magazines for adults, right? They're talking about how to do your hair and makeup and, how to work your 401k. So like, as a child, I didn't know all of these things were out there and available to me. And so it was so wonderful to see this family too that acted a lot like mine, that talked a lot like mine. I would get made fun of for not like talking Black. And I was like, what? Look at me. I don't have to prove anything to you about whether or not I am Black. But certainly, my mom still can't talk with slang. She was an English teacher for 40 years. She cannot do it. It's sad to watch her try to do it. Like, I'm able to speak in slang, but again, I shouldn't have to for you to decide that I'm Black, right? And so stories like the Cosby Show, like the Huxtables, they broadened what it meant to be Black. And that's what we're trying to do with these books, right? We don't want kids to grow up thinking, I have to be either Harriet Tubman or I have to be like the youngest marcher, even though it's a fantastic book, but I've got to like overcome. You don't have to overcome. You can just be, and that's totally normal. That's what, I was trying to get at.
Yeah, no, that's beautifully said. And you have something else that you wrote. You said, I guess an ice boxer that you do at work, which is, which you ask at your book club. How old were you when you first read a fiction book whose main character looked like you? And I'll ask you that question first. And I'm curious, what is the common answer when you get that question that you give to people?
Well, for me, it took a long time for me to figure it out, but I think I've pinned it on Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, and I was in high school. And when I talk to people of color, like really across the board, like Middle Eastern backgrounds, Hispanic backgrounds, they're all like, yeah, high school, maybe college. One person told me college. But then when I talk to white people, they're like, what do you mean? All the stories, right? Which is great, right? Like that's the whole thing. The stories that we tell are telling you what's normal. And if you're never in a book about not wanting to brush your teeth, if you're never in a book about loving fairies and mermaids, then, maybe you're just not the norm, right? And so the goal with Jambo is to really show kids of color, no, you're good. And you're good just as you are. And you belong here. So, you don't have to go look at books that are taking place in another country to find yourself because you're right here.
And you were a lawyer, or are you
Yes.
still a lawyer? Okay. And you're a mom. At what point, obviously you were feeling this for a long time, but at what point did you say, I need to do something about this? Like, I'm going to take action and create this book club.
Sure. Well, I was on a break from work. I worked until my first daughter was 1. And then, she and I just, started hanging out. And my father-in-law was really sweet. He got us a book subscription from a book club. I don't want to name it. It's not very nice, but some of those books are being reviewed now, right? So these books would come in and they were great. Like a lot of them were classics and I didn't mind. I'm pretty open. But they're all from the 40s and 50s. And so like every single person is white. And there's a book that obviously is supposed to take place in like Turkey, somewhere Middle Easternish. They're like, all of the minarets and the architecture is very clear. And every single person in the book is white. And I'm like, nah, for real. And then, there are these great books about summer and bouncing balls, and like every single person is white. And I said, hold on. I want my child to know, you got balls, balls.
Yes.
We can do summer, right? And I would tell her, I was like, look, we're looking at this book with all these minarets. this is not what the people look like who live there, okay? I've been. It's not how it works. So I was just like, oh, I wish we could find books about, kids of color just doing all the regular stuff. And we would look, and then so many of them were taking place somewhere else, or they were about historical figures, or they're about kids, overcoming. And I think all of that is awesome. You should know that you come from strong folks, but you should also know that, it's cool to want to pet. And so I said, golly, I wish somebody would just send these books to our door. That would sure make my life easier. And since we couldn't find a subscription that would send the books to our door, we said, maybe let's do a little bit of market research and see if we should start it. And it was positive. So we did.
I love that. So with these books, first of all, I love your passion. I think that's such a big part of it, right? Like you have to be excited about, sometimes passion is a mix of like things we love and things that frustrate us.
Yes.
And we're like, I just need to find, right, this answer. So when you did this book club, because you're not writing any of the books, it's more of a package you're sending. So what is your process and your team's process in making sure that you find books that are really showing the diversity in this world? And is that hard? Like, are you seeing more in 2021, more books kind of showing this?
It depends on the age group, honestly. The middle grade books are fabulous now. They are so good. And like, they show everybody. So like, I want to send tons and tons and tons of those. So there's so many great ones. It gets harder as you get younger. Once you get to the 0 to 2s, it's really difficult because we send 3 0 to 2 books each month, because like usually like 2 of them are board books, so they're pretty small. One thing about board books and books for very young kids is so many of them aren't about people at all. They're about animals, buttons, flowers. And so then once you get to, that's like 27% of children's books are just about animals. So then once you get to what's left, 50% of those are about white kids. So now you've got this very small number of books that feature children of color in these books for the very, very youngsters. So I'm constantly looking for those. I always sort of like put out the beacon. Anybody wants to send me, their books, just send them on and I will review them. And really our criteria is pretty simple. It needs to be a fiction book. It needs to star a child of color. Child of color. That's something that's not always clear to folks. But it's got to star a child of color. And I love it a little bit less so for 0 to 2s, but we really like for there to be some sort of story that's fun or uplifting that the kids can really, sort of sink their teeth into. We hope to send your children some of the books that will become their favorites. Like, that's our goal. And so, a lot of times 0 to 2s will be about counting, but then we can find some really fun ones about, a kid that's escapes from his crib with the help of his huge dog. And then like the dog gets in trouble because the kid's out of the crib. It's just fantastic. It's fantastic.
So let me ask you, it's interesting that you're saying kind of that like toddler age, which actually I find, even though they're not reading just yet, a lot of parents tend to read to their kids at that age. Why do you think that there is a lack of diversity in these books? Do you think it's because the team that's creating them at a publishing company is not making it a priority, that they don't have diversity inclusion in their staff? Is it because people of color don't feel comfortable writing books? What do you think the issue is here?
I think it's a couple of things. First, we don't have enough own voices, authors or authors of color writing these books for the very, very young. Like, that's just the first thing. It's starting to get a lot better in like the picture books, sort of the hardcover picture books, but in those youth books, it's really hard. So, you end up going back to classics like Your Snowy Day, everything by Vera Williams, Brian Pickney, but you will see a lot of those names come up over and over and over again, Grace Lynn, because there aren't enough writers of color writing books for the youngest kids. And then it is an issue of, publishers, right? They have to reach out to these writers, right? So, I'm always looking for, books that are great, period. Like my first responsibility I feel is to our readers, right? But then second, I do want to find those books that are by writers of color. And a lot of the books in the 0 to 2, for instance, are by white authors who have included, kids of color as the stars of their book, which is great. I include those, but I want there to be an opportunity for authors of color to be picked up and molded and mentored by the publishers so they can get theirs out there too, because theirs are going to be different. Just a different person's going to have a different story, different imagination. And it actually teaches you a lot about the culture when you don't even realize you're learning. For instance, I was reading a lot of books by East Asian authors, and I said, dang, they're all about food. Like, is there anything that's not about food? And then I said, wait a minute, maybe it's really important in their culture. Right? And that's why there's so many books about it. But I had to read a lot of books to get that understanding. And and I think about, there's so many books by Black authors where there's like dancing and music and bopping and, but that's important in our culture, right? Mm-hmm. Music is important in our culture. And so these are things you can learn about a culture when you have writers from that culture writing about their own upbringing and their own childhood and what they know about themselves. So I do think part of the problem is there's just not enough writers of color doing books for that young group.
So does that mean that maybe you'll be writing some?
You know what? I have thought about it.
I think so.
But the more children's books I read, the more I realize how hard it is to write a good children's book. Because when you think about it, these people are creating an entire world that you care about. You know the characters. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and they use like 100 words. That junk is hard.
Maybe you could write it with your kids. How old are your kids now?
9, 5, and 8 months.
That would be perfect. That would be great. Like maybe, I don't know. I've taught, first of all, I'm from New Jersey. I live in New Jersey. So props to a fellow Jersey person. Yes. But I've also been a dance instructor also for a long time. And one of my favorite age groups is the 8 to 10-year-olds because they're super creative. And we always do something at the end, like a circle, and I'll ask them a question. And the imaginations just run wild. You know what I mean? And it would be really interesting if you had them kind of come up with it and you curate it and grammar and all of those things, that would be really interesting.
That's actually not a bad idea.
Yeah. Do you think it is a parent's job to teach their children about empathy and diversity and culture? Do you think that it's a parent's job to do that from day one, or is it the kid's job to figure it out eventually?
Well, if it's important to the parents, right? Mm-hmm. For some parents, they're like, I don't care if they're empathetic, right? I don't care about diversity. Then it's not your job to teach. Please don't start. You're going to mess it up, right? But if you think it's important, then absolutely, and we teach our kids colors, right? And we spend so much time being like, look, this is red, this is blue, this is purple. So why wouldn't we also say, you know what? People's skin colors are different. And that's not bad. So when you're looking through a Jambo book, you can say, hey, look at her skin color. What color is that? And your child can say brown. And then you can say, oh, and look at her hair. Her hair is not like your hair. What do you think? It's pretty, right? Like, this is how we do it, through active reading, the same kind of reading that you do with your kids anyway. When you have texts that have, characters who are different from your home in it, then that's an opportunity for you to show that diversity is important, that different people have value, and that they are as important as, we are, as you are.
You brought up an interesting point. You said, in these books, you can, as a parent or anyone, can point out the differences, but then say, isn't that great? Isn't that beautiful? And I think that there's a lot of people, white people, that don't know what to do. And so they either are like, no, we're all the same. And they don't want to differentiate, or obviously on a not great side, they overemphasize the different. And I love how you're saying, look, yes, we are different. Let's notice that. But then let's have a positive to it. that we all kind of add to this beautiful rainbow of a world, and especially in the US because we have so many people from all over.
Exactly. And like one day we'll have the Olympics again. And, you know, when you can watch all the different teams come and then the United States comes and you're like, that motley crew of folks, look at that. It's awesome. You know, you can really celebrate that with your kid. Whenever you see a US team representing anything, it's always like, yeah, I can tell who's from the United States. And that's awesome. That's great.
Yeah. What have your kids or any of the kids, if you've heard from the parents, felt or experienced having now seen books that resemble not only people like themselves, but also seeing much more variety, especially maybe in areas where, like you said, they are a minority in a group? You know, it's not as much of a diverse community. Have you heard anything from the kids, or have your kids kind of said anything?
Oh, for sure. I'll start with my own. My now 9-year-old, and I would say they don't talk as much about kids who are different because kids are very self-centered. You know, and they're supposed to be, but you know, my 9-year-old, when I first started showing her the books we were getting for Jambo, she would say things like, oh, "Her hair looks like mine." It's so good. There were no kids with hair like mine when I was a kid. It just was not a thing. And so for her to see that and feel proud and know that she's represented somewhere separately on the written page, that is just, that's everything for me. And, you know, she also sees books. So her name is Sophia, and there's this whole series like called Sophia, you know, Sophia finds the perfect word, something like that. But Sophia's family is very erudite. They're like a lawyer and a judge and, you know, a businessman. And so they speak in these big words and they're very fancy. And I love for her to see that, you know, in a Black family. And my husband's mother somewhere has East Asian in her ancestry, and their eyes like have a little bit of an epicanthic fold. Like if you look, you're like, oh, their eyes could be a little East Asian. So we have this book that we're going to send out soon called Eyes That Kiss in the Corners, and and it's by an East Asian author, you know, sort of about, you know, their gorgeous eyes. But, you know, my daughter will look at me and say, "Mommy, why are my eyes not like yours?" You know? And I say, "Oh, they're like daddy's. You have eyes that kiss in the corners." So I show her this book that is full of East Asian characters. There are no Black characters in it. And she's like, "Yeah, her eyes are like mine. Yeah, my eyes kiss in the corners." So, you know, it's just different ways of talking about how beautiful we are. It's different ways of recognizing how wonderful we are. You know, you don't got to be pulling your eyes back and doing crazy stuff. Like, these are eyes that kiss in the corners. That's it.
I love that.
That's so sweet.
It is so sweet. I wish, like, I mean, because again, it's so much of the parents' job and at home, but then as they get older, you know, the issue is, as you mentioned, the media, it's social media, you know, and especially middle school, high school age, you know, just people comparing, and they're just not secure at that age. And so it's really a challenge. But I would assume if you're a parent and you're talking about these early on, they're going to be less of a chance of having an issue, I would assume.
Yes, that is definitely the hope, that you're building a strong foundation for your child. But then also, if other kids are reading these books too, then they might start to have an expanded view of what beauty is as well. So that it's not just you have to be blonde and very thin and that's it. So
you know, it's funny because you know, I can speak for just as a woman. So I do stuff in the tech space, and a lot of times, you know, you go to a conference and it's primarily men. I've actually been at a conference where I've stood in a room and just was like, where are all the women? Like, I just was like, and I remember I looked in the room and I found one and I like booked it right to her. And I was like, hey, like, you just were like, let's connect, we're women. And then she was Latin, and she said to me, where's all the Latinx people? I was like, I don't know. And I, you know, and it wasn't like, and the two of us just started talking and hanging out, and I, you know, it's not that any of the men did anything wrong. And I think sometimes like people think that, but then reverse it. So I went to see, before COVID, in New York, I saw Oprah and Michelle Obama speak. They were amazing. I don't know if you saw it when she did like her Weight Watchers thing.
Mm-hmm.
You did too? Oh my God, so good.
Mm-hmm.
So I went, so it was like 98% women. And Oprah called it out. She stepped on stage and there's a few men there and she's like, oh, how's it going, men? You know? And it was like, and the men felt uncomfortable. They were like, this is awkward. And I was like, now you know how we feel.
Exactly.
Not that anyone is, you feel like I don't belong here because there's not representation. And so I can just speak from that from, like I said, my own standpoint. So I can only imagine, you know, from an ethnic standpoint, from, you know, LGBTQ, you know, whatever somebody is that is going through, if you don't have representation, then you just, again, it's not like anyone's doing anything wrong per se. You just feel like you don't belong or fit in.
Right. I mean, you know, when you're the odd person out. Yeah.
So it's, no, I mean, it makes sense, you know, what you're doing. And, it's really exciting. Like I said, to be able to have someone look at a book and say, oh, that's me, but then also say, oh, wow, look at all these other types of people. And, you know, I think that's better. Do you notice too with your kids or with the other kids, if you've heard anything, do they interact better in school?
You know, I don't know. I have not heard anyone tell me that, like, you know, their kids are interacting with, you know, kids of different races or different ethnicities in school better, you know, now that they've joined Jambo. You know, my kids are in schools that are majority white. So, you know, if they're going to be friends with you know, with other kids, they're going to be friends with white kids. And so, you know, we haven't had any problems except once. And it wasn't like a problem, but we have this book, Lift Every Voice and Sing, which is the Negro National Anthem. And it's gorgeous. And the whole thing is illustrated with lithographs of like slavery and, like, you know, people struggling, right? It's not good. And but my daughter loves it because she wants to be an artist. So she's always in this book and she's always reading the lyrics. So she's showing it to one of her little white friends. And she's like, this is what your people did to my people. And I'm in my office and I'm listening and I'm like, I'm like, oh, I'm in trouble. Oh my God. And so I'm literally just listening. And, you know, her friend is like, nah. And she's like, yes, you did. All white people did. Oh, goodness. And I was like, so let's talk about that. You know?
I was just saying, I'm curious how you approach this conversation.
Well, you know what? I waited till her mom came. And I was like, so this is what happened. Sorry. And she's like, it's fine. You know, like, the girl's dad is not even from the United States. He's like from Europe. And so she's like, you know, we've had, you know, the Black Lives discussion with her, you know, Black Lives Matter. And so it's fine. She needs to hear from everybody. Like, okay. Like, they're still best friends, thank goodness. But I was like, but it's good to hear kids talk because they're just friends. So it's just something else they talk about. You know, they talk about their nails. They talk about their LOL dolls. They talk about, you know, what your people did to my people.
Well, I think, you know, I did an episode on this show where right when the Black Lives Matter, I always say it's always going on, but, you know, in 2020 really happened. And I had two women come on and they talked about, you know, they were like, I don't want to talk about why we're different. They're like, I want to talk about why we're the same. And it was this beautiful conversation because, you know, they were like, yes, I want to be noticed for being a Black woman, but at the same time, like, don't separate me. And just the importance of, like you're saying in your books, again, notice the difference, complement it, support each other, work together. It seems simple. It seems like, right? It's like, it does. So what would you say now, because you've, I'm sure, read a lot of books and seen a lot of books. What is one of your favorite books?
Oh gosh, you know, one that I really wish I could send out again is Best Friends in the Universe, and it's like about Hector and Louis, and Hector's probably Hispanic and Louis Black, and they are the best friends in the universe, and they're like these maybe 6-7-year-old boys, and they get into everything together, and like the illustrations are just so bright and in your face, and they're like, and they're finishing each other's sentences, and then they get in an argument, and then they're like, oh, we hate each other, what are we gonna do? And then they come back together again at the end. And I love it to pieces. I love it to pieces.
That's cute. So if people want to learn more about Jambo Books, or they want to learn more about you or your story, where's the best place to do that?
Please follow us on social media. We are Jambo Books, and we are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And of course, our website is jambobooks.com.
Perfect. And the last question I like to ask all of my guests is, what is one word or quote or mantra that you try to live by every single day?
Oh my gosh, wait, I know this one. I know that sounds crazy. But oh my gosh, okay. Now I understand that there is another group of people that are trying to steal this, but much like the American flag, I will not let them have it. It is mine. And it is that quote about, the devil whispered in her ear, "You are not strong enough to handle the storm." She whispered back, "I am the storm." So that's me all day. I am the storm.
Yes, I love the move. Like I said, I'm a dancer. The movement. Yes, I love it. It's so good. Well, like I said, I love your passion for what you do. And, I'm excited to see this grow. I know you've been on various publications, and I congratulate you on your hard work in the business, but also just, again, what you're doing for kids, for the community. It's so important. So I thank you so much for being here, sharing your story, and sharing some insights with us.
Well, thank you so much, Carrie. This has been a lot of fun.